Matthew. Pam, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you, Craig, Brian, Eve, our friends at Cambridge Consultants, and Altran, the group. My name is Dr. Phil Budden. I'm the British Consul here in Boston, and it's an honor to be here. I stand here in considerable humility in that I am the speaker before Lita Nelson of MIT. So I see myself as a sort of the warm-up act for Lita. In preparing for this, it struck me this is quite an odd thing for a British diplomat to be invited to do, is to turn up and talk about innovation. Most British diplomats, most of my colleagues, spend their lives worrying about Afghanistan and counter-terrorism and bringing peace to the Middle East. My job here in Boston, rather like my job down at the embassy in Washington, is very much focused on innovation. So I'm delighted to have accepted the honor to be here, because this is really what we're about here at the British Consulate in Boston. Now, bridging the Atlantic is something that we Brits have long done. Given that I'm the Brit here in Boston, I'm often reminded of the rich history. Way too much about the revolutionary period and tea parties and massacres and things like that. But if one goes further back, Boston was originally settled by English pilgrims and Puritans who sailed across from Britain. They came from Boston in England, but most of them went to university in Cambridge. So when they were deciding what to call the local areas, they, being very imaginative Brits, decided to call them Boston and Cambridge. So we're used to bridging the Atlantic. We've been doing this with our American friends for a long time. But it's only really here at the start of the 21st century that we've really moved into bridging the Atlantic in terms of innovation, and particularly linking up the hubs. So what I'm going to do today is tell you briefly how we got here and why you have a diplomat talking to you. Tell you a bit about what the British Consulate does here in Boston, and then set out what we might do in terms of future collaboration. So, thinking about innovation. We've been thinking about innovation for at least the last decade explicitly in Britain. And being good diplomats and bureaucrats, even with something as broad as innovation, we need guidelines. Britain is a series of small islands off the northwest coast of Europe. We are 60 million people, which in a world of 6 billion makes us about 1% of the world's population, so there's not many of us. We do happen, however, to produce about 5% of the scientific papers and research in the world, which is not a bad batting average, 1% of the global population producing 5%. That still means that there's 99% of the world's population out there for us to partner with, and that 95% of the scientific work is being done elsewhere, especially here. Now, we'd long regarded ourselves as being strong at science, but moving into innovation was very important to us. And this was a matter of great concern to my then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, now my Prime Minister. Innovation, not just for itself, but the way it feeds into productivity, economic growth, and ultimately jobs. So what we did in the early 21st century, picking up on initiatives from Gordon Brown after he had a very civilized holiday just south of here on Cape Cod, watching this particular hub of innovation, is we created a global science and innovation network. And I'm delighted to have members of my science and innovation team here today, Jackie and Laura. We also set up an innovation strategy specifically to work out how we're going to move from being good at science to actually creating that fundamental innovation. We put $1 billion behind our 10-year program. And we've now created a department for innovation, originally called Innovation, University and Skills, now Business Innovation and Skills. Innovation is at the heart of what the British government does. Having determined that we were going to be committed to innovation, we wanted to find the best practice in the world. We wanted to find the places where innovation was taking place. And particularly, we set out with guidelines about what such an innovation ecosystem would look like. So starting at the top, we went out of the world looking at places that had a real source of people with excellent technical and business skills. You can guess the answer of what we decided was our key hub of innovation, so I won't hold back. It was going to be Boston and Cambridge. But what we found here in this area, what my then Chancellor of the Exchequer saw when he was down on Cape Cod, was MIT and its spin-offs, the business schools, all those great graduates coming out of Sloan and the Harvard business schools, just providing a wonderful pool of people right here in this area. Secondly, going clockwise, a source of market knowledge and understanding. It's remarkable the depth of global analysis, whether it's investor analysis or public policy analysis that's going on here. Also, in terms of market understanding, you have serial entrepreneurs here in the Boston area, which we envy back in Britain. In terms of support and advice, it's remarkable, particularly in the Back Bay area, the depth of the legal expertise, the accountancy, and particularly at the entrepreneurial end, working out how to use the intellectual property and accounting methods to actually advance innovation here. We also had wonderfully here a source of physical space and labs, which we don't always have in parts of Britain, both university labs and corporate ones. The space we had in East Cambridge was remarkable. Then there was the source of money. There's very quietly trillions of dollars of assets under management in the financial district in downtown Boston. Much more understated than, say, our friends out on Wall Street, but highly effective and creating enough of a capital pool right there that there is money for the venture capital and the angel investors and philanthropists who are so key to the innovation ecosystem. And finally, the source of ideas, the sheer innovative ferment that we found here, gave us the easy answer to what we were looking for in an innovation ecosystem and where we were going to set up. So Boston was that hub of innovation, and we've put most of our effort right here into the Boston area. We made a commitment under one of my predecessors to actually move the consulate, just to show how serious we are. We used to be in the downtown district, very close to the Boston Massacre site. We were there, however, because we started off very interested in the financial district. But they decided, at the turn of this century, that actually where they needed to be, because this is a town of small neighbourhoods, was right over here in East Cambridge. And so we moved. We're currently in 1 Broadway, the first building you reach as you cross Longfellow Bridge. And some of you may have heard recently that we're moving again and embedding our relationship in that innovative hub even further. We're actually taking MIT as a landlord. We're going to move into 1 Broadway. We are building out the office space as we're there. And this underpins our commitment to being right here in the hub of innovation. My department back in London, when they heard that we were giving up our lease and moving, said, we heard something about Route 128. Wouldn't you like to move out there? Because that's where the technology is. And we had to explain to them that it was a bit of a trek. And in terms of the things that we see going on, and things that are so important to 2/3 of my staff being this hub of innovation, it's being right there in Kendall Square that matters, close to MIT, close to companies like Cambridge Consultants. So we're delighted to be taking forward that relationship. And having discovered that Boston was the hub of innovation we wanted, we then started looking even more closely at it. What we hadn't realized, again, perhaps it's New England understatement, is that Boston actually sees the 2nd largest amount of venture capital in the United States. There was a piece in the Boston Globe today, $558 million just in the last quarter, second only to Silicon Valley. Great quantities of money are being carefully deployed right here in this Boston hub of innovation. And that's not something that any of the other British consulates around the US see on their doorsteps, except for our friends in San Francisco. There was also a useful study by Roberts and Easley for the Kaufman Institute on the entrepreneurial impact of the role of MIT. It's very useful putting hard numbers on this for my diplomat bosses back in Washington and London. That if one looked at all the companies that had been spun out of MIT and by its alumni, there'd be 25,800 companies that employ over 3 million people. And with world sales of $2 trillion, they'd be the 11th largest economy in the world. These are the kinds of numbers that get the attention of people who are interested in innovation, and even the attention of general diplomats, when you have to explain to them why we have such a large British consulate right here in